Very good. It's 1 o'clock, so we will begin the edict meeting. We have a couple of different items on the agenda, and so we'll start. The number one is the Economic Incentive Program White Paper. And Mike, if you'll get us started with that. Thank you.
I'd be happy to. And good afternoon, committee members. Thank you for your time today to receive a presentation from our consultant who has joined us virtually today, Colin McQueenie. Colin is from Boise, Idaho. Colin tried very hard to get out here yesterday. Unfortunately, that did not happen. So Colin is going to be presenting virtually today to your committee as well as to the City Commission this afternoon at 5 o'clock. Just a brief background on what this study was all about. 4 tasks that were identified in the study, and one that we really wanted to focus on was a white paper, a comparative white paper, talking about what we do here in Fargo relative to other cities, primarily Midwestern, but other cities as well, outside of the region with economic development incentives. And so this particular white paper, it completes their work that was scoped in what was called task number 2. And so the receiving and filing of this report tonight by the City Commission will officially close that out. And then when we get a different day and a different travel opportunity for Colin to come out, we're also going to be receiving an economic impact model. And we'll talk about that later with this committee. Colin perhaps could just highlight that briefly for you today. But this will be a model that our staff and the Economic Development Corporation staff will utilize when we further review applications in the future, so that we make sure that they conform to what we have, but then we also look at what we really need to do to try incent and provide for opportunities to get business and industry here in Fargo. So again, today we're really focused on task number 2. Colin was very good to put together a slide deck for us. I will be advancing his slides, and he would be happy to answer any questions that the group would have at the end of his presentation. So with that, Mr. Chair, if it's okay with you, I'll turn it over to Colin, who's here virtually. Colin, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us virtually. We're sorry you couldn't be here in person.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Michael. And for the time here, Chair and committee, I got as far as Denver and then I had to head back home, unfortunately. And I don't have too much time today, so we wanted to sort of just address the highlights of the white paper. And Michael, next slide, if you could. Thank you. Yeah, so, we want to touch on a couple of things. The white paper, I guess maybe not too much of a white paper because I think it ended up being maybe 25 pages or 20 pages, but really gives, a bit more further detail and analysis to what we're going to be talking about today. So next slide, please. The committee here, I'm sure, is well versed in all of the city's current policies, but wanted to just bring a couple highlights to the presentation here. First being the Renaissance Zone. We took a little deeper dive into the property values there and saw annually there was an increase of about 5.5% annual increase in property values, which actually outpaces the overall housing market in Fargo and is actually twice the rate of inflation. So really seeing some positive financial impacts from the efforts going into the Renaissance Zone. The city has also identified 28 future sites for the Renaissance Zone. And if you just take sort of general density factors of commercial development and multifamily development, that gets to a potential of over 1 million square feet of new development within the zone that could occur if the Renaissance Zone continues. And it's also worth noting, there's a number of different qualitative positives that's come from the zone. You just start talking to folks around town and you hear, hey, I moved back to town because there's so much energy in the city, like there was 15 years ago, or, I started business here 20 years ago and never looked back because of how much, entertainment and options and the safety and the quality of life aspects that have come through the Renaissance Zone. Another program that we wanted to highlight here is the city's special assessment financing for infrastructure, and that's traditionally done more in the suburban greenfield developments. And although not unique to the Fargo area, this is a unique public strategy nationally. Typically, for new infrastructure, the developer has to pay something like an impact fee, which is collected at building permit, which is used to fund those public infrastructure needs, or the developer itself has to take the full burden of that and wait until their project is complete and they can start recouping those costs. Here in Fargo and under the special assessment financing program, those capital burdens are shifted to the city, which allows for these smaller local builders to be successful. They can enter into smaller housing projects without this oversized front loading these costs. And although the risks are shifted to the city's had success in mitigating those risks through strategic margin structuring of that debt and how it's recouped over time. Next slide, please. Figure here is showing the 8 comparable cities we looked at. Across the country, TIFs are pretty common. Tax abatements, land banking is a common strategy. However, if you look side by side between these comparable cities in Fargo, it becomes pretty clear that the city of Fargo has a much more comprehensive incentive program compared to these other cities. There's a number of other tools in Fargo's toolkit to help incentivize growth and redevelopment. Next slide, please. We did a academic research review, and from that, a couple points. Successful incentive programs target industries with high job multiplier effects. So those are jobs, let's say if it has a multiplier effect of 3, it would generate 1 direct job, but then 2 other jobs. So actually there's 3 new jobs overall in the community from those types of industries. Also, successful programs target exporters. So those are bringing in new dollars to the community compared to other businesses that just might be circulating resources within the market. And also, successful programs target certain areas of the community for a specific reason. So if you're trying to bring in a job generator, the more successful programs locate those developments within the areas of community with the highest unemployment. We were seeing in the academic research, shorter programs reduce public dollars, which is, I guess, a no-brainer, but yet that typically matches the business's more short-term outlook in forecasting of their operations. So a shorter program does match up with typical business practices. Also, there's a number of other programs that are available that are less costly than tax incentives. These remove barriers for especially small to medium-sized businesses, like regulatory assistance and job training. Next slide. A couple case studies included in the white paper. First being, if you've been down to Dubuque, is their waterfront development. In the 90s, there was a coalition of partners that targeted this brownfield area of the city along the Mississippi River. And really over time, it's come into a real sort of cultural celebration and economic driver for the city. Over time, I think it's been about $400 million in public and private investment gone into this waterfront development. Brought the story of Duke of Kentucky into the white paper, where they were seeing a blighting neighborhood just adjacent to their downtown, and put together this program to bring artists that paralleled their history of cultural arts and trade. And over, I think it was about 5 years, they were able to redevelop over 100 buildings, creating sort of live-work studios, and also creating, this synergy between what exists there in the city and what was being attracted into the city. Lastly, you'll see in the report a case study around Kansas City and St. Louis of misguided and misused TIFs. Here, the authors found that there was a vast majority of TIF subsidies were going to programs within affluent areas, not really benefiting, impoverished neighborhoods. And they brought to light lack of third-party oversight, lack of standards when evaluating proposals, and then lack of reporting and tracking the approved proposals, and really seeing if they were living up to the economic impacts that they promised and agreed to during their application. And the authors noted that through this, the standards and the reporting would be the first steps of a program to claw back any incentives that were given to these developments if they didn't generate the impacts that they promised. New slide. So recommendations here, top line, from our perspective, Fargo has a robust and thoughtful incentive program. You're incentivizing development both within the city and on the suburban edges. There's a long, history of success in both of those spheres. Now, we do recommend continuing those programs with just a few tweaks. We do recommend the city really target high multiplier jobs. If you're looking at, again, to my example of multiplier effect of 3, we're not just generating that one direct job. We're also impacting the supporting services around those jobs. But also, we recommend targeting developments that will bring in sales tax. The city collects 1% for general capital, and then also another 1% for the flood mitigation. And bringing in those high sales tax generators will help mitigate other property tax incentives. And a note here, the Tischler Bias tools will help staff estimate those numbers. We do recommend the city review the time maximums that they allow for incentive programs. This is, should be based on the nature of development. Programs developments like affordable housing typically take about 20 years to finally find financial success, while other sort of for-profit businesses, again, are looking at more short-term, 3 to 5 year forecasting, and we recommend incentive programs matching those business practices. We do also recommend removing the new residential house exemption, that 2-year property tax exemption. From our standpoint, this benefit is marginal compared to the overall cost of home ownership and mortgages. So it's really not playing an important element in the buyer's consideration if they should live in Fargo or another neighboring community, all the while reducing revenues for the city. Now, this is a common incentive program across the metro, so Fargo would be the first to remove this exemption, but from our standpoint, we're seeing the city really putting together a nice comprehensive incentive program already for new new residential construction. So I don't think removing of this new housing program would alter the perception of the city's position on growth. We also recommend exploring new parking opportunities. Right before COVID-19, the parking capacity usage was reaching capacity. Now, in the short term, you're going to see folks still continuing to work from home, yet you are seeing more full-time residents downtown, and also the commercial attraction of downtown continues to grow, and parking needs to grow with that. We do recommend exploring land banking opportunities, especially in areas of the community that might be experiencing disinvestment, and also explore partnerships and opportunities to develop and commercialize the waterfront of the Red River. Next slide. So a couple more, just calling out the economic model. You're going to see a couple screenshots in the next couple slides, but really the staff and user just needs to operate two tabs. The first one being the input, and for a residential proposal, that's going to be housing units and the values of those homes. On the commercial side, it's going to be the number of jobs and the project value. And then the next tab is just going to have the outputs. So in the background, we're including economic multipliers and sales tax generation factors for the one-time construction phase, and also the ongoing impacts of that program, of that proposal. Next slide. So here's just calling out an example. You're seeing on the left, the user inputted 100 new home, let's say subdivision. Market value for those homes is $400,000. And you're seeing the outputs there on the right. Next slide. So the first phase is that construction phase, or the one-time impacts of that event of the new homes being constructed. So you're seeing the direct jobs for construction jobs, but also the spin-off effects of the induced and indirect jobs to support that activity. You're then also seeing spin-off retail sales tax revenue, not for the raw construction materials, because that may be sourced outside of Fargo, but this would be both the other construction needs, but then also the spending of those new jobs that are created in that construction phase. Next slide. And then the ongoing impact, and this is for a residential project, is the ongoing impact of the new household spending within the community. And you're seeing the different factors here just illustrated. And then, so the spending that's generating new jobs like retail and service jobs, but then also the spending that generates retail sales tax for the city. And I believe the next slide is open for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was just fantastic. Lots of great information. And I do think this will lead to a lot of good discussion in our group, and also on the city commission and the city in general, because I just think it's, I don't know, from your perspective, I guess we have to be a little bit complimented, because there's a lot of things that we are doing well, like the land trust and things like that. And I did have to smile. I noticed the EDC was here represented, and when he talks about primary sector, that's kind of their wheelhouse. And so I don't know if you got to pay extra to have them focus on those things, but a lot of those things are exactly what the EDC works on. So just want to thank you very much and open it up for questions. I will say, from my perspective, it's a little overwhelming, because this is a lot of information to absorb, and I do think our committee and the other committees will be discussing this as time goes on. And so thank you. And just my comment was, I love having the perspective of you looking at similar cities around the country, Colin. I really appreciate that, because a lot of other people have good ideas that we can copy, and so that's a good thing. With that, any other comments or questions? Mayor.
Colin, I just had a question on the 2-year tax exemption. It's worth about $87 million of housing. We do that, but on the other side, their value of their housing is about $260 million. So I do get increased tax revenue. My concern is if that goes away, I'm competing with Horace in West Fargo. We did 360 houses this year. Horace did 248, and West Fargo did 220. There'd be a little bit concern on our part at Fargo if we drop that incentive. Could we lose out on market share?
Well, Mayor, yeah, thank you for the question. I think that folks want to be in Fargo. That other communities are being successful, but I think the market drives some of these decisions, and I don't. From our standpoint, this would be a move towards limiting some of those incentives for new residents. But Fargo has a strong attractor, and folks want to live in Fargo.
That's because we have such a good planning department. Is that right? Thank you, Colin.
Yeah.
Arlette.
I just have a question about the analysis that you did in the first step. Were you able to take a look at past projects and how they were distributed geographically? You referred to the lower income kind of districts and whether our projects were distributed appropriately that way?
Good question. We did not take a project by project analysis. It would be interesting to see that, like they did in St. Louis and in the other community, but we didn't do that analysis. We were taking sort of a comparable analysis.
So the reason I asked the question, I can think of one project that actually moved from a lower income district out into probably an upper income district. So it would be probably something that would be wise for us to consider in our criteria.
Any other comments or questions?
I have a question.
Jessica.
Based on the white paper and the outcomes that are listed here, how much of this project was done with primary research versus secondary repurposed research?
Ooh. Oh, I can't give you maybe 50-50. I mean, we did, there's a section in there of academic research, so that's not our primary research. That's us reviewing academic papers. But we've done that quantitative analysis of property tax and looking at overall growth, especially within the Renaissance zone, but then also projecting that out for the new site. So that's primary research.
Okay, thank you.
I guess I have a question about you had a chart where it showed the numbers, and is there a way that we as a city can incorporate that to evaluate some of these new developments and things like that? Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, Mike. And I don't know if we can pull that up again, but just show that where kind of makes it more objective, where it shows here's how much it costs and here's the benefits. Can you go back to that? Thank you.
So I believe, excuse me, Commissioner Preston, you're talking about the actual model. You're talking about the slide right here. And yes, so the one thing that we're going to be doing, let me just talk about next steps very briefly. So the one thing we will do is spend some additional time with Tischler Bice on the implementation of this model. So this committee is going to hear about that work, but then also we want to make sure that we're saving some agenda time in the future to talk about the recommendations that come out of the white paper. So Colin will be out at some point here when the weather permits to train our staff, to meet with the EDC and talk about what this model will look like and to make sure that we understand how to run this. I would think this would be quite complementary to the work that this committee is already doing, but then also help us inform future decisions about do we need to modify or tweak some of the recommendations that we currently have in policy, working with the EDC, working with our staff, and just figure out if that's something that is warranted after we take a look at this and kind of take a look under the hood. This is the piece we haven't seen yet. This is task 3 and task 4, and we really look forward to having Colin come out and talk about this input-output model. Colin, I should defer to you too. Are there any other highlights you want to make off this? I mean, I really see this as being quite a bit of utility and value for the city and for the EDC.
Oh yeah. Thanks, Michael. Entirely. Yeah. So everything behind the numbers that you're seeing is Fargo data. So these aren't general numbers. It's using a proprietary information from InPlan, which is sort of a nation-leading economic impact data source, and this will really help staff understand those economic impacts, but then trying to understand other revenues that would be sales tax specifically to help mitigate and really put together a more complete picture of what a proposal will bring to the community. Also, what should be noted, this is not profound statement, but it's not all about the dollars and cents too. So, there's going to be some proposals that might not financially pan out and be a positive for the community, but are addressing other community goals like affordable housing or traffic or job improvements. So that this, I guess, shouldn't be the end all be all, but it's helping to paint a better picture of what a proposal would be to Fargo.
And Mike, can you talk a little bit, so the steps going forward? Obviously today it's receive and file, and we'll obviously, and the public will get a chance to see this. Can you talk a little bit about how you see this, us incorporating these things going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that question, Commissioner Pepcorn. So what we will do, we're going to receive and file the report tonight, the white paper identified in Task 2 tonight at the City Commission. We will get trained up on this particular module and about how to operate this. Colin will come back out, and if it actually would work out, and if the schedules would align, it'd be nice to have him present to this committee, in the future, talk about that, and then we're actually going to implement this. And so we're going to run through real-world proposals as they come through our door in the city of Fargo and actually use this model to try better understand, what we should do and what we should tailor, to specific prospects or proposals. And so this will be something that think about this as really step 2 or step 3 on about a 5-step process. So this is not the end. This is really just the means to the end, and this will be something that we continue to talk about here in the spring and summer months. And so we just want to give you the status report today on the white paper, let you see that, but probably most importantly, talk about those recommendations that Tischler Bice is making on the residential property tax abatement program, as well as some of the times and durations. I think those are the follow-up discussions we can have with this committee, talking about should we be looking at some of those timing matters. I know that this committee has already done some pretty deep analysis in the last year or so on the programs that we offer, but I do think that we're never done, and so this can be something we revisit as now having this data and utilizing this data to try and make sure that we're refining that and tailoring it, making it even stronger for Fargo.
That's great. I thought that most interesting thing, obviously the Renaissance Zone has been very successful, but it's kind of interesting now property value prices in the downtown are increasing faster. That was not the issue 25 years ago. It was the opposite. We were losing it faster. So that's just great news from our perspective. Any other comments or questions? Otherwise, we're
Chairman Pepcorn.
Yep. Go ahead.
Joe Riso here. Can you?
Yes, go ahead, Joe. I'm sorry about that. We couldn't see it. So go ahead.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to mention to the committee, we're really excited to continue the work with Mike and his team on staff and the consultants. Just a few quick comments. I know there was some talk about kind of the economic incentives and how communities track that. I think Colin brought that up with some issues in St. Louis and Kansas City. And just a quick update for the committee, we're still working on kind of behind the scenes systems work to capture that for future incentive negotiations on projects that are primary sector, and hope to have some resolution to that over the course of the next month or two. Second, we're very familiar, as I think when we announced the Amazon project and some others, we have probably a national expert in economic modeling. Not that the folks at Tischler Bice can't be helpful to all of this as well. We use the same system InPlan, so as that training comes forward, we're well versed in that, and we have a local expert at NDSU. So I think that's important for everybody to know. And we use that on Amazon. We're going to talk to the county commission this afternoon on the soybean processing plant where we did a very similar impact for that. And I do think that the recommendations that were shared, I'm happy to hear that this is kind of the start of that discussion because myself and my team have looked at that and really want to be at the table as you're discussing the various policies and those potential impacts. And lastly, I'd just say that TIF is used quite a bit. It was noted in the report. It's not used as much in this market as it is in others, except it's called a different name here. It's called specials here, is essentially what it is. So that, as you all know, that the city takes on a lot of risk within its housing infrastructure development. Whereas in other markets that I've worked in other places in that report, it's usually focused on industrial infrastructure in a lot of cases. So I just wanted everybody to know that we're on board and are looking forward to working with you on this.
That's great, Joe. Thank you very much. And I do think this is obviously collaborative with you, and a lot of this is actually in your wheelhouse. So we hope you didn't step on your toes or anything. But I think that a lot of these are us working together. And the one thing I wanted to talk about the specials is the one thing I love to hear is what that does is enable small builders to compete with big developers. And I think that's what a lot of people, we don't tell that story well enough, that what that does is enable small builders to be able to build a house or two instead of a whole big plat. And so that's a good thing about Fargo. And so specials, sometimes they get a little bit of a bad name, and I do think that's a good part of it. So any other comments or questions? Mayor and then Jessica.
Just a comment on when Joe mentioned risk. Actually, specials are low risk for the city of Fargo, so it's really a low risk tool that we utilize. So I was pleased to see that helps out. And then when you're saying national experts, I thought that was Ryan, because Ryan usually shows us these models that multiply. And it's really true. You got to remember the other effects of anything we do here in this community. It's jobs, and it's retail spending, and it's with other people when they move into our community, what happens. So it's really good to see the positive remarks that you have on your tables, and I'll be curious as well as we go forward how those things happen. And Amazon is a tremendous addition to our community, but that did a variety of things. It increased the wage throughout the community and increased a lot of people in our community. And it did not have any TIF or pilot to help it grow in its way it's grown. It just took a good team that got them on the ground faster than normal. So I think these will be helpful going forward. Commissioner Pepcorn, I'm really pleased that we are seeming to do the right things with our incentives. Thank you.
Yeah. I had two questions, but they don't have to be answered today. First one was on the fourth recommendation, and it talks about the maximum length of the city incentive program and makes comment that the small and mid businesses put more weight on a shorter time frame of looking at operations and looking at staffing and how they're going to pay for things. And I'm interested to hear how we would want to incentivize them to think on short-term basis for their planning and for the growth of their business, and that I think we can reevaluate the time frame, but I wouldn't want to discourage them or to think that they don't have to think about long-term viability to stay in this community, and that we would support that. Number 5, also my concern would be compounding the workforce shortage. When we look at bringing in and what that multiplier could do, that there are other areas that are going to be impacted by the decisions that we make and the businesses that are brought in, and that we have to be able to support the dependencies that will make those businesses viable. And so is there a way that we can look and forecast out our workforce shortage and what it'll do even further for a problem we're trying to fix now, and that we've addressed that in any areas that we want to focus on? So if we could talk about those two questions later on when we have maybe more information, but I would like to make sure that we're thinking about that.
Very good. So do we need a motion to receive and file? Or can you give us some advice on that, or what is the step?
No, I think, Mr. Chair, the commission will receive and file tonight, and so if you are agreeable, we can take some future agenda time to talk about these recommendations and next steps at this committee level. This is really the working committee to get into this, and so we appreciate your time today. Thank you so much, and thanks, Colin, and Joe, too. Joe, appreciate your comments and jumping in. So we'll make sure to get Colin out here and make sure that this committee gets to meet Colin. So thank you so much.
Very good. Thank you, everybody. And so unless there are other comments, we'll move on. We have a couple other items. Number 2 is review and recommended sale of 419 3rd Street North. And Jim, will you get us started with that?
Yes, as you know, we have two proposals for this particular site. One from Authentic Housing, the other from Kilborn Group with several different options. We're dealing with this Authentic Housing. It's a very new organization and sort of a new use of low-income housing tax credits. So I asked our financial advisors, PFM, to take a look at the finances of it and give the city some advice. And we have online, Fred is with PFM. And Fred, I don't know, do you want to just summarize your suggestions and recommendation or thoughts on this? And then we'll see if the committee has any questions.
Sure. Can you hear me fine, Jim?
Yes, we can.
Okay. The way the technology works these days, I'm never sure. Yes, PFM, you asked PFM to take a fast review of the 419 project, which we did. And fundamentally, it's from my perspective, having done a fair amount of similar projects over the years, a fairly straightforward multifamily, what I would call workforce housing for the most part, using a combination of debt, tax-exempt debt, and low-income housing tax credits. The low-income housing tax credit program, I'll kind of talk about that briefly because it sounds like the city's not terribly familiar with that program. But it's been around since it was an element of the 1986 Tax Act. And I would say since then has been a critical component of, some folks would say as much as 90% of the newly constructed or remodeled affordable housing projects done across the country. Those tax credits are monetized into equity, which come into the project as equity to supplement the debt financing. So it enhances the project financing pretty radically. That's what's proposed here by Authentic Housing. We looked at their pro forma, constructed our own pro forma, and don't have any reservations about what we see there. The one thing that they did not give us, which would, I think, be useful to the city in an effort to determine, whether this is the project you want to move forward with, is to ask them for a couple of additional things which they did not include, which we commonly see with applications. And similar to this, it would be great if they were able to produce a preliminary commitment from a lender, which would indicate to you that that a lender who would on a preliminary basis say, here's what we think about the project. Here's what we think the terms would be if you asked us to move forward in terms of loan term, debt service coverage, loan to value, all of those critical financing issues which bear on the ability to get this project financed. The other thing that would be good would be a companion preliminary letter of intent from an equity investor or a syndicator, basically saying the same thing, that they've reviewed the project, they're familiar with the market area, they like all of those circumstances, and from a preliminary basis, subject to completing their own credit review and due diligence, they think they could lend into this project. The third thing that would be nice would be an actual market study, which identifies the characteristics that one should be sensitive to about. This is not a small project. At 181 units is pretty decent size. Not having worked in Fargo, I'm not familiar with the characteristics of the neighborhood that it's proposed to go into. So a market study does a pretty good job of of helping you get a bead on that. How does this property fit into the marketplace? What do you think? What do they think the demand for the units would be at the rents that are proposed? How long do they think it would take to lease up the project? So in aggregate, all three of those, I think, would give you a better sense of the ability of the proposed developer here to actually pull this project off.
Does anyone have any questions?
Any questions?
Yes, Prakash here. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Prakash.
Okay. I know those concerns that the PFM, or the not the concerns of recommendations the PFM made, is the authentic housing folks, are they present there now?
They're not. They got stormed in trying to get up here, and I don't know if we have any connection with them or not.
Okay. The only reason is that are they able to make any reactions to those comments that was made by PFM?
And we do have some people on the phone line. Those aren't identified, so I apologize for that. If they are joining us, please speak up. Otherwise, Mayor, go ahead.
We did get an email from Tyrone. It said it would take him a while to answer some of the financial questions, as far as I understood. Fred, my question to you is that if we're getting a housing study done this year, would that answer the elements that they would have to request on the housing analysis? MetroCog is doing a study that should be done by this spring. Would that help them in that question? What is the need?
Mayor, are you saying you are actually about to embark on a comprehensive housing study?
That's correct. That would fill that need, right?
I think the other probably big market question is, can you rent apartments without parking? I think that's one of the questions that would need to be answered in the market study.
Yeah, that's a very. Thanks for reminding me about that, Jim. This is a rather unique concept that it's proposed to be constructed without dedicated parking, which is quite unusual. And I'm not, again, familiar with the neighborhood into which this project is going to be placed. But what that would typically do is, unless you have reason to believe that all of the tenants here are going to be mobile without vehicles of their own, if there's no on-site parking, it's going to put some strain on the neighborhood, and maybe this neighborhood can accommodate that. But I think you'd at least like to know that.
So in your experience with other communities and doing this kind of project, when you say it's unusual to not have parking, I'm assuming you're talking, I mean, the entire metro area is about 250,000, so we're relatively small. And transit isn't really great here. It needs a lot of work to get people where they need to go. So my question is, your experience with other communities similar to ours and the lack of parking, it does get to be a big issue? Is that what I'm hearing from you?
We've in recent years, we've seen the advent of a number of projects like this that are done in conjunction with the terminology is transit-oriented development. It's done in conjunction in an area which tends to surround a major transportation hub that provides readily accessible mixed transportation to adjacent areas, so the folks find it easy to live in these units, but still have the ability to very close to the unit, if you will, access mass transit to get to the places where they can find employment. But if it's not if it's a neighborhood project, just a general neighborhood project, or it's situated adjacent to other retail activities, more normal retail activities, parking continues to be an issue. Now, clearly, trying to mitigate the from an environmental perspective, there's certainly a trend towards minimizing vehicular presence in the communities to the utmost extent possible, which is a commendable goal. But then what that usually results in is fewer parking spaces per unit than the historic average. But this is pretty significant if you have no dedicated on-site parking.
I just want to jump in real quick. The word is robust. Our public transportation isn't as robust at this point. We hope that it will be eventually, but to give you an example, the other thing we have is we have blizzards. And so there was no public transportation until 10 this morning because the buses weren't rolling. And so I do think there's, just because we haven't done this before doesn't mean we shouldn't look into it. I think it's something that we need to look at. But to me, at this point, I'm not sure we're at that stage as a city. There's Uber and all the other things, but to me, you have to have buses every 15 minutes and every day of the week. And right now, we are not that robust as a city. So that's just my editorial comment. Any other comments or questions? No, we're not doing shout outs from the. Go ahead, Jim.
We also have Kilbourne Group is here. I know maybe they want to make any comments on their timing as far as how time sensitive, your decision is. They can't really get started, and we can't do if they're going to have incentives, do their review until we, get a recommendation to City Commission. So I don't know if Keith or Mike, do you want to just comment on how important a decision on a project that's ready to go would be?
Thank you, Jim, and thanks for hearing some comments here. So yeah, from a timing standpoint, both from preliminary financial studies have been done. We've been working with investors to get going, but to secure that investment, to move that 100% into action, it's critical right now to get that going by this fall. The goal is to break ground this fall. But the other big component of this right now is really from a design standpoint. There's only so much you can do with GIS maps, Google Earth, those types of things to plan a site. We really need to start looking at geotech and soil studies and borings and things like that, understanding the proximity to the railroad, the proximity to the underpass. That will ultimately drive foundation design systems and things like that. So there's a lot of design work to get done in a short order. We feel like we have a path. It's not an easy path to get there, but we have a path to get to a false start. Pending your guys' decision, but timing is critical, and every day we lose is time that we can't get back right now.
John.
Fred, maybe we could jump back to you here. You're recommending a letter of intent, both from a lender and someone that will marshal the tax credits and sale of tax credits. What type of timeline would you have on getting those in place?
Well, I think the both of those parties are accustomed to producing those for exactly the purposes that we're describing. They don't view them as a definitive commitment, which is why we refer to them as a letter of intent or preliminary letter of intent, because the first thing that they will do is say that this is what we think for this project, we believe this is how we would structure it. These are what we think the terms would be, but this is all subject to final due diligence and credit approval internally. So they've gotten pretty adept at producing those pretty quickly. I would say that both a lender as well as a equity syndicator should be able to produce a preliminary LOI both either for the debt or the equity within, well, I'm going to say within a month, but that's based on the fact that I suspect the proposed borrower developers here have less historic activity to a lot of the times these were your developer borrowers have a lot of long-term relationships with other projects, and I'm not at all familiar with whether it's the borrower here is in that situation. I suspect maybe not. So it may take a little longer, but so I think that conservatively, they should be able to canvass the universe of parties out there, and if somebody is interested in the project, they should be able to get that done pretty readily within a month. Frankly, I'd like to say less than that, but I think a month is a reasonable time.
Mr. Chairman, Fred, adding the complexity of some of the unique features of this, is that going to cause a problem? Or as we look at the full due diligence process, I mean, the last thing we want to do is get into a situation where we commit to a project that gets strung out in the whole financing end of it, and then it's going to have to rely on additional studies for approval.
What your situation is, you control the site, you're considering selling it to the developer. What we see in virtually every project, somebody is in that position. Somebody controls the site, which the developer wants to acquire to build a project, or it's an existing established facility. They want to acquire that facility and do a full top to bottom rehabilitation of it, either one of those two. So the owner of that property has exactly the concerns that you just described. They don't want to commit and tie the property up and then have it take a protracted period of time to get through the process. So they'll invariably put a stop date in a letter of understanding, a purchase and sale agreement that basically gives the acquiring party a certain number of time to get everything that they need to do done or they lose control of the property. In which case you can either under your own, with your own circumstances, decide to give them an extension or proceed with an alternative buyer.
This has been an interesting discussion. We sat down with Tyrone Grandstand and submitted to him a different offer. The Housing Authority is willing to work with him on the Burrell property. Cost of that project is 12 to 14 million. They will be willing to put up the land and work with them to do the authentic housing and allow them to get the financing. Not 50 million, it's 12 million. And in discussing with Tyrone, I think that would be a much better project for them to embark upon. Authentic Housing just incorporated has not done a project at all in the past. But they can prove it to the community that it works if they start on a smaller project, and if that works, we can do it in other parts of the city as well. And to Fred's question on parking, that could be negotiated out with the Housing Authority as well. Tyrone and their team have some different car rental type things that could happen, some different transportation options as well. I think it'd be a great discussion to have, and I don't know, Arlette, if community development would be the team that would work with them as well, but I think that would be a much better option to do that. You have the Kilbourne Group is ready to go now, has financing, it would be in the ground building, and the money that we get off that TIF will help us do 3 other low-income housing projects. The Housing Authority is taking down the high-rise. We'll have 120 units of low-income housing after the high-rise comes down. So we are going forward with a variety of projects. I just want the committee to know in the community. And we have 2 projects going on with Beyond Shelter right now, Kmart site and another site as well. So we are committed to low-income housing, but I think the better option with the time concerns we have, and I'm glad Fred told us those time concerns, because we can really start pushing it, The Housing Authority is not in a position now to do the project, but would be in a position in 1 or 2 years, which is that, I think that's going to take time to work everything out. So would that be my suggested option for the authentic housing?
Is that a
Mr. Chairman?
motion?
That's a motion.
No, I had a comment before that. I've been trying to get your attention for a few minutes. If I received this on the day of vote and proposal, I'd be a little bit upset. It's not very timely. It's very well thought out and real valid, important questions. But in all fairness, it's not giving time to the group to address those. Mayor, I understand what you're saying there. On the other hand, I appreciate everything that Kilbourne Group has done for this city. Wow, it's just turned some things around downtown. And I also spent a lot of time researching this project and talking to Tyrone, and it is a project that Fargo needs. So if this does go in the direction of Kilbourne Group today, I hope that our city really does take a deep dive into this, because it's addressing the walkability in the in-focus. Yeah, the blizzard's a big problem, but unless we move Fargo, that's not going to change. It addresses childcare needs. I'm hearing that all over. COVID really brought that to the forefront of just how important that is, the cost, the lack of availability. I initially had some really strong concerns. After talking with Tyrone, he addressed every one of those. They are a new group, and yet I love their passion and their forthrightness. It's hard to put together a package and spend so many hours on it when you know that the strikes are against you. So I'm sure that they didn't know how far to take this. Like, do we get a letter of intent? They are working with U.S. Bank. And there's just some things that can't be finalized until you get the bid or the project. So I'm all for a project like this. I'd like to see more effort put into supporting our lower paid people that work in the service industry downtown. I remember what it was like in my early years to work paycheck to paycheck and to have to pay daycare. And those are really valid concerns. So thank you if that's going to be addressed in that study. It needs to happen.
Yeah, I would repeat basically everything Deb said, and just add a little more to it. And that is, I don't believe this can be fixed with just moving one project over. We have to look at the overall picture of this type of workforce housing at the lower end of the income scale. And what we've seen so far downtown certainly has been a little bit higher kind of housing pricing. So, one additional project, perhaps on the Burrell property, might start to make a dent, but we're talking an employment center of downtown with a lot of service industry employees. So I do believe that we need to look at policies, at what point and at what aspect does the city come to the table with some either incentives and or free land and or whatever else that might entail. So approaching this much more at a programmatic level and developing policies that will probably provide a more strategic approach long-term.
Thank you for your comments. Jessica, do you have?
This is Mike.
Okay.
This is Prakash.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Prakash.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I'm not going to repeat everything that Matt and said, I think she summarized my feelings exactly the same way. I never had a conversation with her or any one of you, but I think every one of those points that I was going to bring up, Deb Mathen summarized it for me. So I totally agree with all the statements that she made about all the points that she brought forth.
Thank you.
When did PFM start working on the document that we had today? Fred, when did you start putting your pro forma together? Did that process start?
Yeah, I'd have to look it up. It was several weeks ago. We had to wait until we had all the financials from Authentic Housing. We had sent it to them. I think they had at least a few weeks. You see, there was a letter dated last week from PFM that was in your packet.
Yep.
I had some questions on that and got that letter this morning, kind of clarifying some of their suggestions. So.
Okay, the reason why I ask is because we should be giving them the same opportunity of a duration to respond to it. If these are normal requests, and I think that they are as letters of intent, that we would respect them enough to have weeks to respond instead of the day of. But I'm excited to hear more about the project and how they're going to address need that we clearly have. It doesn't mean that the outcome is what everybody wants. However, we have an obligation to be respectful of their time and the work that they've done so far. So I would ask that we postpone any type of decision until we give them, at a minimum, a few weeks to come back with some of these items so that we can talk about it.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that this seems like a rushed process here with this information coming in, but I would like to, excuse me, compliment the staff in this situation. I'm used to situations where you ask for proposals, you evaluate the proposals, you make a decision. In this case, I think staff has worked extensively to help a new group provide more information. And I'm just going back and looking at my notes from our first meeting. These weaknesses were identified for them and asked to respond. And what we've seen is a change in the proposal as we continue to go along, which has forced staff into the position of saying, okay, at first we were asked to gift the land, we were supposed to lend them money to buy the land. Now we're gifting the land. So we see a proposal that's evolving and changing, but that's not typical for everybody else in the process. We haven't seen these type of changes. And so I agree with the mayor that this is an exciting group. This is an exciting proposal. It's new, it's unique. But I think we have to be careful in saying we're going to slow everything down. A smaller project for a group new to the whole process probably makes more sense. So on the one side, I appreciate giving them more time, but on the other side, I look and say, there's other people that have put effort in here and need to make decisions going forward. So I'm not confident that they're going to be able to produce the information on a timely basis to go forward. And if we do decide to wait a month or whatever the time frame is, I think we could be into a situation of seeing the project delayed a year or longer.
I definitely respect that. My concern with not giving, there wasn't anything formally. I know we mentioned it in meetings and asked for clarification of finances, but I don't remember seeing anything, and I could be wrong, but I don't remember seeing anything that was formally in writing, like a document like this that said, please provide this list of items in a formal manner to a group that has not yet had the ability to go through the process and full process from start to end. And as a committee, I see my role in this committee as having a responsibility to usher people through this process that have never been through it before. Now, that doesn't mean that they are given circumstances that aren't fair. But at one point, Kilbourne Group was in this exact same situation. And I probably guarantee that at some point, we tried to usher them through that process. So care, concern, and empathy for people that have not been able to do it yet or didn't know how. Not a long deadline or extenuating circumstances. Put a deadline on it, and I hope they rise to the occasion and provide everything needed so that we can have a discussion of more apples to oranges instead of apples to we don't know. But give a timeline and say, here's your deadline. Everything that we have formally requested in a document is now provided to you, and you have 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever it is, and let's make the decision then. I don't know we've formally given them respect to do that yet.
And I guess I would object because the first time Tyrone came in front of us, I asked those. I wanted to know the financing, what it would cost the city, what was going on forward. They weren't even incorporated. So they weren't even really legitimate at the table. They were an unincorporated group coming to us. Number two, there was $7 million that was going to come from somewhere. The housing authority assumed that was from them, and they had never committed to a $7 million. The migration I see in the financial package is I asked Jim Gilmore, can we have a solidification of the financial package? Kilburn has given us what they want, what they're going to do, and how they're going to go out and finance it. I've not seen that from Authentic Housing. And in talking to Tyrone, he says, yeah, U.S. Bank will give us the money. Well, then get the letter from U.S. Bank, if that's what's going to happen. I don't see he's in planning. I mean, his role here in our community was he was a planner. He knows the rules. I mean, he knows if we have people coming before us, this is how we do things. So I don't think it was unconscionable to ask them those types of questions. First meeting we had, I said, I'd like to see the finances. There's multiple areas where Jim pointed out the tax revenue wasn't correct, other things weren't correct. So when we asked our group to look into that, when we asked Fred to look into that, it says, what would we usually find here? We're not finding that. And the tax credits are extremely hard to get. When we try to get tax credits for the state of North Dakota, that's going to be a huge hurdle. So that's why I'm saying, I think they can move forward on a project, but I think a smaller project to get their teeth with, just get into it and start it it'll probably happen. I don't think that they're going to be able to sustain a $50 million project. I just don't think when we talk to other people that are in that market, that does not come easy. That's a very difficult task. And how many projects have we done? 0. They've never done a project. So that gets me great concern on going out on land that we're going to give to somebody and another developer comes in and we know they can do the project.
I see this as two different sections. This is, the first section is requesting an RFP with the same set of requirements and standards, a decision, and then execution of the project. I'm not in execution yet from a decision standpoint. I'm still trying to see the viable avenues of this organization to execute it all. And I don't feel that we've had, if there is a list and we know the process and we know everything that's required, to see line item by line item, every single requirement in its detail that you need to provide as an RFP to this city to answer it. And if you don't have it, it doesn't make it to the table, because we've decided that here's everything that is required of you to provide. And I think that would that some of that organization might take out some of the gray area of the process, because if you don't have it, you don't get in the game until you do, which would inspire people to, okay, what do I need and how do I go through it? Because if we didn't have a viable project or to make an evaluation, I preferably don't want to see it, because I don't want to fall in love with it or have disagreements with it or not understand it and being asked to make a decision. So this might be just to the context of putting forth very rigorous, detailed requirements and asking people to meet that, or it doesn't make it on the docket for review.
So we have a motion. We don't have a second yet. So before we do any further discussion, we have the motion. If we need to repeat it, we can, but otherwise, go ahead.
I can withdraw that motion because I think we're going a different direction. I don't know which direction we're going. So.
Well, Mr. Chairman, or actually, I'm the chairman, so if it's okay, I'm going to second the mayor's motion. I believe that's allowed. Anybody can correct me. So that's where we are. Now we can still have further discussion. Go ahead.
To make it easy, I'll second the motion. So you don't have to yield the chair. You have to yield the chair to second a motion. So I'll happily second your motion. I did have one comment, and very detailed request for proposal proposals to a specific project make sense. What we have in these situations is the developers coming forth with their vision for a property. And it would be almost impossible to have a specific checklist. What we're doing is we're buying a project with our participation. And so it's incumbent upon the developer to provide all the information and the ability to sell their vision as part of this process. And so when we look at the risk factors to us, we've got to consider all aspects of it. One is the experience of the developer, and you can't get experience without doing projects. And so to make this the project, if we went out and said, okay, we're going to do requests for proposals on this, and what we're going to do is this is going to be a learning one, so get ready and we'll go through the whole process. I don't think that's what we want to do with this exact project. I would be more than happy, and I know staff would be more than happy to do some training sessions and different things on how a proposal should come forth. But this one's concerned me from the very start is that we've taken more time and effort with one developer over the other developers in the process. And they've committed resources. They've spent real money putting this forward. And they know they're competing for it. So if they're turned down, they're turned down. But if we take one participant and say, okay, now we're going to provide extra assistance here, I don't think we're treating this in a fair manner. And quite frankly, having the strength of the proposals on all of these three projects is tremendous. We don't want to lose that advantage. And there may be, the next time we do this, developers that look and say, well, I'm not going to participate. And then we've hurt ourselves. So I would encourage that we would look at this, make the decision based on the request for proposals and the information that we've gotten.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask, do we even have a quorum here?
We have we have 4 of the Renaissance, and we have 4 out of 5 of
Okay.
DTEM. So I believe we do. Gosh, being on the phone, Dave being on both committees.
Yeah. Dean Bershani had asked me to vote on his behalf, but I told him I didn't feel comfortable doing that without knowing his wishes. So he is in Arizona and cannot vote. I have one comment. I realize there's timelines and everything, and Kilbourne is ready to move forward and needs to get things done. But in all fairness, when we give somebody these kinds of questions on the day of, and they can't be here due to weather, as many can't today, I would like to see us give them 3 weeks. We can vote by a Zoom meeting, get the questions answered. It's a matter of fairness and equity. And I realize what you're saying, Mr. Cosgrove. Yes, we have given them a lot of time and attention. It's very true, but it's a project like we haven't looked at before.
Any other comments or questions?
Do you want me to call the roll on that vote?
Well, let's clarify. I want to make sure that we follow the rules correctly.
Oh.
So the mayor made a motion, correct? And so if you,
And the motion is?
Yeah, what is the motion?
do
What's
you
the
mind,
motion?
do you mind repeating the motion?
My motion was to direct the authority, housing authority, the Authentic Housing to work with the housing authority on a project of the Burrell project, in which both parties would be able to come forward. Also, the letters of credit and all those could be developed at the same time. I don't know if you want to now do 2 aspects. I'm just thinking, I think the better project for them to work on is a smaller project to prove that it works and to set up a reputation of able to bring forth a project that works for the community. And I'm actually just really redirecting them to work with the housing authority on the Burrell project is my recommendation.
So that's the motion, and I also want to make sure we do this technically correct. So
Yeah, it's a unique situation. Why don't I just read everyone's name and we'll be able to.
no, I just want to make sure about the second, because technically then I should give up the chair unless someone else wants to. John seconded it?
I did second.
Okay,
Took
so
you
then,
off- took you off the hook.
so I just want to correct that too, just to make sure that we followed it correctly. So now we will, unless there's any further discussion, does anybody else have any further that they want to say?
Mr. Chairman, I think
Go
we
ahead.
need to be clear. Are we awarding the project then to Kilbourne
Yeah, this is not clear.
or, or, you know,
The intent of the motion is that would be a separate motion.
okay, all right.
So
Okay,
can somebody restate the motion without the extraneous stuff?
I think the mayor's motion is to ask the Housing Authority and Authentic Housing to work together on the Burrell site.
Okay.
Mayor,
Yes. Oh, sorry.
Mr. Cosgriff,
Aye.
Jessica,
No.
Deb,
Nay.
Arlette,
All right.
Prakash,
Nay.
Dave.
Aye.
I mean, overall, we have 4 yeses, 3 nos.
So the motion
The,
passes. Very good. So is there more, as far as the awarding it, is that a separate issue? And we're not going to be covering that?
That's up to the will of the committee.
Do you think that'd take 3 weeks for them to do the letter? When you're asking for 3-week delay? Do you think they'll be able to respond to us in 3 weeks?
Mayor, either way, they can say we can't do it in 3 weeks, but at least it's giving them the opportunity to respond to a request.
I guess the other thing is they will have an opportunity going forward, working with the Burrell property to do the same thing. We need to find out more about their financial horsepower. That's what the bottom line is. And so this is an opportunity for them to do that, so.
Right, Mayor, that's a good point, Mr. Chairman. If they find that acceptable, they would maybe move in that direction, and this would be a moot point.
Would move to approve a 3-week delay?
So I have a technical question there. We've already voted and it already passed. And so is this a separate issue?
Yeah.
Okay,
I would second your motion, Mr. Mayor.
we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Mayor,
Yes.
Deb,
Yes.
Arlette,
Yes.
Prakash,
Yes.
Jessica,
Yes.
John,
No.
Dave.
No. Motion passes. Very good. So I think that completes the discussion on that, which went a lot longer than I thought it was going to go. That's okay. Thank you, everybody. That was good comments. Okay, so we have 3 items on the agenda for the Economic Development Incentive Committee. So if the Renaissance Zone would love to stay and visit, I'm sure you would, but otherwise it'll just be us voting on this. So we have 3 items. Approve the EDIC meeting minutes of 1/25/22.
Move to approve.
We have a motion and
Second.
motion and a second. Any further changes or corrections? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Number 2, Dakota Specialty Milling, a 5-year property tax exemption. Jim, will you get us started on that?
If Rajheim is here, he can introduce this, or we have someone from, Ryan, do you want to come up and introduce the Dakota Specialty Milling, please? You'll see in your staff report, there is a recommendation that it be approved based on the scoring.
Thank you.
Thanks for your patience.
So, yeah, I feel like we were teed up a little bit today with the Tischler-Bice analysis, because we got a company here that's not only are they an exporter, almost all of their their product that they're creating goes and is sold outside of the market. I think almost 100% or close to it. Value-added ag, which is obviously the impacts from that are compounded. You're taking local ag resources, which then benefit the ag community, and people go and there's spillover effect and ripple effect from the impacts to the ag commodity producers. Company that's chosen to grow here a number of times over the years, has several properties now in the Fargo area and has done some significant expansion. They're now looking at a project that's the result of, I guess, onshoring to Fargo some current work, new customer, new product line that's currently being produced in another part of the nation. I don't want to say too much because some of it is sensitive and proprietary. So when I turn it over to Peter, I'll let him tell you more about it. But essentially, this expansion would be to accommodate that growth and to bring that work here to Fargo. And so they're looking at approximately an $8 million investment. $4 million of that, again, approximate would be new building, and $4 million equipment. The building itself would be an expansion, a 40,000 square foot expansion. They're currently in 19,000 square feet, and they would be expanding that by another 40,000. So they would be in about 60,000 square feet of space in this one particular property by the time all is said and done. The investments in equipment would be for large oven equipment and a number of investments in automation and autonomous equipment to help with productivity, with efficiency, and as we know, with the labor shortage, being able to do that investment here and keep that work here is critical. So currently paying $25,000 approximately property tax on the existing property, and so this is a 5-year exemption request at 100% for the increase in value on that additional 40,000 square feet. So Peter, who's president and CEO of Dakota Specialty Milling, is here, and I'll let him tell you more about the company and the project itself.
Sure. Well, thanks, Ryan. Thank you guys for hearing us today. So our primary business is milling, blending, and toasting, especially grains, both from the Fargo and North Dakota regions and other value-add crops. We have another business in St. Louis, Missouri, and by growing the business there, we have an opportunity to expand one of our lines. It's more baking focused, so we do baking powders, donut mixes, different things like that down there. The opportunity to expand arose because of customer requests, so part of the business is based on us growing our business outside of the St. Louis region, and since we have operations here, we thought what better place to grow than to continue to grow in Fargo. So we have an existing opportunity to take something we're not currently doing in Fargo and grow that line here, as well as increase the amount of warehouse space to further optimize our milling operations that are currently in Fargo. I guess I would open it to questions if there's further thoughts or ideas on the project.
Any questions, Mayor?
Peter, weren't you guys going to do this one time before? You had a plan to expand and you pulled it back?
So we had a pilot expansion in 2016 that was for the mill tower optimization as well as our gluten-free plant. We did complete both of those projects at the time. It was just too big of a bite. So this was, I believe, phase 3 in our application in 2016 that was approved. Obviously, the time period for that has expired. So we are.
That's why you're reapplying. Okay.
Yep, and so the project slightly changed as well because the property that we're adding the 40,000 square feet onto is still the same project that was stated in 2016. However, this time it's not just warehouse; it's also value add. So the current opportunity from that customer in St. Louis would be. We said that we would look into building that if they could guarantee us about 10 million pounds of business a year, which they've agreed to. So we'd bring that here, and that's what's creating those jobs.
Congratulations. Glad you're growing. It's a great plant. Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other comments or questions? Otherwise, we'll accept a motion.
I'll move to approve.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And our final item on the agenda is the J Street Properties. Jim.
You may recall there was, I suppose a year and a half ago, there was a fire along First Avenue North. I didn't bring the video this time, but I think you're probably all familiar with the site. The proposal is to continue to clear that site. I think a portion of the building still remains. 90-unit apartment building would replace that. The site's certainly blighted. I know, Matt from PFM, are you on? Maybe you can kind of go over your report. We sent this to PFM for a but-for test, and the recommendation was that, Matt, go ahead.
Yep, good afternoon. Jimmy, you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Wonderful. All right, so I think people have seen this report before. I'll just kind of go over some highlights and then our analysis that we do. We do have a proposal for a 90-unit rental apartment building. They are requesting $1.25 million in TIF over 10 years. PFM kind of, in their analysis, they looked at that, and that 1.25 million they're estimating would be fulfilled in year 9, actually, so it would be a little bit shorter than 10 years. As for the project, the developer is investing 20%, which is about $3 million into the project. And as we have done in the past, we've put together a pro forma, both with and without TIF, that helps us look at, does this project actually need public assistance, and if so, how much does it need? So the two metrics we look at for determining the need for the public assistance, we look at an internal rate of return, and we look at debt service coverage. For this project without TIF, the internal rate of return is 5.58%, and with TIF assistance, it's just over 9%. For a project like this, for apartment buildings of this size, a reasonable rate of return is anywhere between 10 and 15%. On to debt service coverage, lenders, as I've stated before, typically require a minimum of 1.2 times coverage. For this project without TIF, the max coverage ratio is 1.04, and with TIF, it is a 1.28 times. Going beyond just kind of a standard analysis with and without TIF, we do run some sensitivity analyses. The first one we look at is how much would the project need to be reduced in order to have a reasonable IRR. For this project, it would need to be reduced by 10%. And that's pretty high, I think, at this stage in the game. So we think that is unlikely to occur. Then we look at how much rents would need to be increased for the project to be viable without TIF, and that is over 15%. And we do believe that the proposed rents are reasonable. And then finally, we look at those two on a combined basis. So how much would the project need to decrease, and how much would rents need to increase on a combined basis? So both of them would need to move 6%. I think either of these things could occur. Are they going to occur together? Likely not, but there's still some potential there. But again, likely not. So, our conclusion was that based on the information that we received, this project would likely not be viable but for the TIF assistance. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any other comments or questions?
We do have both Mark and Kevin here from J.C. Properties. If you want to add any comments, or they're certainly available for questions.
Well, thank you, members of the committee, and Jim. It's a pleasure to bring this project before you. I think you've seen from some of the other projects we're doing on First Avenue, we're very interested in seeing that as a corridor to downtown, as an extension of a core neighborhood and a peripheral neighborhood of the core of Fargo. We're excited to be one of these first projects in that area, and we hope we're certainly many more will follow. I think it was a pleasure working with Matt from PFM on this project. I think this is a relatively straightforward mixed family TIF request, but happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Mark, can I ask you,